Thank you so much, everyone, for coming along tonight to join together in solidarity with Julian Assange and to raise awareness about the ongoing erosion of our rights and work together to look for ways that we can ultimately address that and help bring Julian home. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Arakwal of the Bundjalung Nation, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to the Midjabul people to the north, Widjabul to the west, Nungbul to the south, and any Aboriginal people amongst us today. This land was never ceded and remains the greatest injustice of our times. My name's Sarah Njai. I'm a local Byron Shire councillor, high school teacher and former journalist. For 10 years now, like many of you, I've been following the story of Julian Assange, watching, reporting and acting where I can. I've called on local councillors, councils and MPs to do more to support Julian Assange, and I've used whatever connections I have to raise the profile of this incredibly important case, one that's important to us all. There's a statement here that I've been asked to read out from the Walkley Foundation. In 2011, WikiLeaks, with Julian Assange as its editor, received a Walkley Award in Australia for its outstanding contribution to journalism. Walkley judges said WikiLeaks applied new technology to penetrate the inner workings of government, to reveal an avalanche of inconvenient truths in a global publishing coup. One of those many inconvenient truths was the exposure by video of US helicopter attacks in Baghdad that killed 11 civilians, including 2 Reuters journalists. Many mainstream journalists worked with Assange, with his material to publish their own reports, including media outlets such as the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age in Australia, The Guardian in the United Kingdom, The New York Times in the US, El Pas in Spain, Le Monde in France, Der Spiegel in Germany. There has been no attempt by the US government to prosecute any of those journalists. The government is relying on one allegation against Assange, that he helped Chelsea Manning crack a password to access a US government computer, to seek his extradition from Britain to America, where, if successful, he seems likely to face other more serious charges that would constitute a direct assault on fundamental press freedoms. Julian Assange's personality and his more recent actions do not weaken the principle driving the Walkley Foundation's concerns in this matter. That when he read the original WikiLeaks material in 2010, Assange was assisting a whistleblower to reveal information in the public interest. Given the potential adverse impact of this extradition attempt on a free, healthily functioning media, the Walkley Foundation Board urges the British and Australian governments to oppose Julian Assange's extradition to the United States. That was in April last year. When last year I spoke, according to Civic, the monitor that looks at a civil society across the world, Australia had shown the greatest deterioration in civic space that had occurred. We were downgraded from a classification of an open society to one which is narrowed, one of only 7 countries to have declined in this regard. Far from the government heeding this as a warning in 2020, in fact, we have seen even greater decline in our civil liberties. There's been a lack of distinct progress by the Australian government to address concerns raised about restrictions to fundamental freedoms that led to this downgrade. Instead, more concerns have been raised over the prosecution of the lawyer of a whistleblower that will be held in secret. Further, the Australian Human Rights Commission warned of overreach within the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation Amendment Bill of 2020. While human rights groups have raised concerns to the UN about problematic national security laws that undermine civic freedoms, the protests have continued to occur in unprecedented numbers in various cities across Australia. At this very time, we should be coming together to celebrate the Human Rights Day, which was yesterday, but the civic rights, including freedoms of expression and press freedom, continue to slide out of reach in this key democracy. The writing was on the wall when Julian was first arrested 10 years ago and was called out by all who would listen, by John Pilger, by Julian's mum Christine and his dad John Shipton and many others. but an incredibly successful smear campaign and the succession of seemingly gutless prime ministers and politicians have meant that those warnings seem to fall on deaf ears. So here we sit, a year later, and what a year it's been. With COVID, the Black Lives Matter protests, increasing revelations about tech surveillance and so much more. And Julian Assange remains behind bars. To find out more about what's been happening, about the trial, about how Julian is and what we can do to help shift this demise, we're joined here tonight by a fantastic panel. I'll welcome them all onto the stage now and introduce them one by one. First up, I'm joined by Mia Armitage. She's an award-winning local journalist and much-loved presenter at Bay FM. Kyron O'Reilly, he's an anti-war campaigner and Catholic worker activist who served prison sentences in the USA, Ireland and Australia. In 2020, while based in London, Kyron came to the aid of Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange, who were being persecuted for exposing the ongoing US wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. This aid included support for Manning's Welsh family and also solidarity with Julian's High Court appearances and later at the Ecuadorian Embassy and Belmarsh Prison. Our next guest, who joined the panel late, and I'm very happy to see our legal eagle for tonight, former magistrate David Helpden. He served for 21 years on the bench, was the head of the law school at SCU, author of 6 books, recently retired, sort of, and practising and volunteering his services for our community at Barefoot Law. He's dedicated to drug law reform, environmental action, and the Aboriginal overrepresentation in our prison and legal systems. And of course, John Shipton, Julian's father. He's just back from the UK where he attended Julian's extradition trial. He's spent the past decade travelling the world, visiting Julian in the Ecuadorian Embassy and in the Belmarsh prison and attending his extradition hearing and other court matters. He is engaged in rallying support in Europe and Australia, trying to secure the release of his son. This week alone, he's speaking in Brisbane, Nimbin, Byron Bay and Mullumbimby. Can we get a big round of applause for our panel? We're going to start the evening with some questions on stage, and then later on we'll be giving you the opportunity to ask some questions from the floor. So have a think about questions you might like to ask. And in the meantime, just to get started, I've got a question for John Shipton, and it's one I'm sure you're all wanting to hear the answer to. A bit of an update on how his son is going and how the trial went.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back, see all these familiar faces and people that I've worked with for 10 years now, since 2013, on Julian's matter. Oh, sorry. The trial itself, I sat with Craig Murray. We were in a gallery above the well of the court. There was seating for 42, but only 5 of us were allowed. So there was Craig Murray, Gabrielle, myself, and John Pilger, and a rotation of other friends. Craig Murray is an extraordinary diarist. If you read his columns, he was able to recognise a circumstance. The circumstance was that Julian was in a glass box at the back of the court, which is slightly elevated, and it had a slot about that wide for him to speak to and hear the court. In order to instruct his solicitors, he had to get on his knees, and the solicitor or barrister had to stand on their tiptoes and put their ear there was an application made before Judge Baritza to have Julian sit in the well of the court, but Judge Baritza thought of a way to avoid it by saying that that would require a bail application. So the Old Bailey had been going for about 500 years. They used to take people from there who were charged with what we would call a misdemeanour now, and hang them in the lane outside. So the sentence would be given, they'd taken out and hanged in the lane, then buried under the footpath. That sense of what Craig called evil was evident, and he wrote about, so that you had Julian. I'll tell you one brief story. So there's the testimony from a man named Al-Masri who was kidnapped and then and sodomized and then taken by the CIA to Egypt, wherein he was tortured to realise that they had the wrong man, and so he was released and went back to Germany. John Gertz, an investigative journalist, tracked down all of the information, and the magistrate, a judge in Munich, was enabled to issue arrest warrants for the 13 CIA agents. The government of the United States said to the government of Germany that if those arrest warrants were enacted, that there would be irreparable damage to the relationship of those two states. That's all in the cables. El Masri was a witness, and it was over video, and the video it worked in the morning, and the tests were done, but in the court, they tried it, and it wouldn't work, tried, so a half hour went by. Then the judge and Judge Baritza, Vanessa Baritza, and James Lewis, the prosecutor QC, began to conspire to have the testimony overlooked. And Julian stood up in his glass box and yelled loudly, "I will not allow this court to censor the testimony of a torture victim." And then he yelled that again. May God protect him. The judge was taken aback and deflated. Equally, the James Lewis hid his head under the table. It's such shame. And the defence was able to read out the testimony. So that gives you some feel, an idea of the circumstances and the continuous unfolding of abuses that have followed the Julian through the last 10 years. I call it myself a plague of malice. But anyway, you will know of it, and that's why we're here. Thank you.
John Shipton, thank you so much for sharing that amazing description of what has transpired, or just some of what has transpired over in the UK at the Old Bailey. I do have some more questions for you, but I actually want to cross to David Halpern now, since we're talking about the trial. I'm wondering, first of all, whether or not you've had an opportunity as a former magistrate to follow the case or to catch up on the case, and in particular the hearings that have happened so far that are now adjourned, and if so, what do you make of it all?
Thank you. I have followed the trial as closely as I possibly can I've been, in fact, accused by my wife of being obsessed. That's fairly clear. And I have read everything that I can possibly find on the case as it's been continuing. As I should say, I think many in the legal profession have, because what is happening to Julian is an affront to the legal system, as well as an affront to Julian as well. Those of us who care about justice, who care about due process, who care about Australian citizens who get into trouble overseas, have just been appalled by what has happened. In terms of the legalities of it, I think it's best simply explained in this way. If a person leaks sensitive material, and that person, for example, Chelsea Manning, does so from a position of authority, then they are guilty of a crime on the face of it under the Espionage Act in the United States. If that material is passed to a second person who is also a spy or somebody who shouldn't have access to that material or the like, they too may be guilty of a crime. But if it then gets to a journalist and that journalist publishes it, then in those circumstances, up until now, they have not been prosecuted under the Espionage Act because it is seen as a breach of their First Amendment rights in the United States, that is, to freedom of speech. And that's why Obama didn't push the line of the Espionage Act, because A, the prospects of success seemed dim, and B, because there was an ambiguity in Julian's role in terms of journalist, non-journalist. So what's happened now is they have chosen to prosecute the case against Julian and to seek to extradite him from England to face those espionage charges. They carry a total, I should say, for both receiving and for publishing that material. Now, whether you call Julian a journalist or not, and obviously, who am I to say, the Walkley Award clearly viewed him as a journalist, but as a publisher of that material, like the New York Times, like the Guardian, like the Sydney Morning Herald, Julian was just doing what other journalists then did with that material. Yet there is not a hint that those journalists or that those newspapers or that those media outlets will be prosecuted. And why? Well, the real reason is far more sinister. Because they want to get Julian. Because they see him as the conduit of Chelsea Manning's material, and they seek revenge. They seek revenge through the criminal justice system, they seek revenge through the extradition system, and that's why it is such an affront to the justice system. Because this has nothing to do with the fact that Julian is a journalist or a publisher. This has everything to do with their affront at him daring to challenge their actions in the way he did. Shining light on the darkest corners of war crimes, and doing so bravely and with guts and courage. They can't have that. They can't have people doing that. That's why I've followed the trial so closely. Of course, until tonight, it's been a bit of an academic exercise, but it's so much more personal now.
Thank you, David. At this point, I might also mention that it's not just the Walkley Foundation, of course, who certainly qualifies Julian Assange as a journalist. I am a member of the Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance. You could call that the Journalists' Union here in Australia. I just want to point out that they too have released several statements over the past few years in support of Julian Assange. They've also written to Maurice Payne when she was as the Minister for Foreign Affairs, the opposition spokesperson on Foreign Affairs, and the British High Commissioner. There's also another group called Doctors for Assange, which I might ask John Shipton about shortly. Furthermore, MIA, as the Media Entertainment and Arts Alliance is known as, coincidentally, also took a resolution which was carried to the International Federation of Journalists at the 30th World Congress in Tunis. So that statement here reads, the recent indictments filed by the US government against Julian Assange pose a threat to journalists and journalism around the world. The indictments clearly seek to prosecute Assange for the receipt and the publication of vital information in the public interest, clearly at odds with previous decisions of the US Supreme Court to protect First Amendment rights, as David Halpern was saying. The Congress supports the call of our affiliates for the governments of the United Kingdom and Australia to resist the application to extradite Assange to the United States, and asks the IFJ Executive Committee to take the case to the UN Human Rights Council and to call on the European Parliament and the Council of Europe to respect the freedom of opinion. That was carried, so I might ask John Shipton now, actually, whether or not you can enlighten us as to your knowledge of the IFJ resolution there to call on the European Parliament and the Council of Europe and the involvement with the UN Human Rights Council, because you've spent so much time travelling through Europe.
Yes, if you don't mind, I'll turn that question to something I know, a narrative that may embrace us all. In 1945, at the end of the World War, a great catastrophe which saw the deaths and destruction of many countries, the people of the world, us, gathered together and constructed the United Nations. We inserted into the United Nations the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Subsequently, the Council of Europe was established, and it's primarily to do with human rights, and the Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg was erected, and the judges, I've had lunch with one from Estonia, they're very fine people. They supervised the exercise of human rights in Europe. Subsequently to that, the national legislation of each country in Europe took the human rights legislation and integrated it into their own legislation. Okay? That this legislation is about us. That's us. Now, secondly, when you read a phrase, a crime against humanity, which Julian and Chelsea put before us in the Iraq War, that's a crime against us, here, all us. A crime against humanity is committed against our children, our mothers, our fathers, grandfathers, uncles, aunties. That's a crime against us. You'll see, last night we had, or was it last night? Anyway, we had the video, Collateral Murder. In it, there are two, what are called war crimes, or three war crimes. They are crimes against us. They're 18 people you see machine gunned to death, just gathering on a street corner, and two journalists with their cameras. They're crimes against us. Kristen Hannison and Julian couldn't travel, as you know, but Kristen went to Elsaida City in 2010, 2011. Very dangerous time, as you know, in Elsaida City. But he took the risk, The WikiLeaks collateral murder thing is an entire package. The second video concerns Kristen, where he shows to the people who never knew what happened to their relatives. The video, and the young men collapse onto the floor crying. So Julian and Kristen were attempting to name the dead, to give names to the dead. It is another war crime, you know, that these people are just, well, disappeared, you know, not even... Anyway, I don't want to climb down into the bottomless pit of human depravity, but just to illuminate to you that this yesterday was Human Rights Day, and that we together instituted, through the sheer understanding of the necessity of human rights and war crimes, instituted these great civilizational constructions of the 20th century. Subsequent to this, lastly, those nations, and unfortunately I carry the burden of my own nation being involved in a gigantic war crime, where there's a man, Gideon Polya, he's an academic, he's about my age, in Melbourne. He understands how to calculate excess deaths. He calculated the excess deaths since 2000 in the Middle East. It's about 6 million people suffered violent deaths, and about 38 million refugees were created, 7 countries destroyed in part or in half, in part or in full. These fighting for Julian, if I brought all this together now. So Julian and Chelsea illuminate for us the war crimes and the crimes against humanity. Drawing all of this together, what I've just spoken of, fighting as we do, successfully in a burgeoning tide for the freedom of Julian Assange, we also give small grains of justice to those that grieve their dead and those that seek new homes all around the world as best they can. A grain of justice. For being witness is important, and we witness and hold Julian in high esteem because he gives us the opportunity to witness, and consequently the opportunity to insist firmly that our government no longer involves itself in these things. Thank you. It's a bit long, but I think it's important.
Thank you again, John Shipton. You have taken us to a dark place. I think we may stay there for just at least the next question. If Julian Assange has taught us nothing else, it's the importance of truth-telling, being brave enough to handle the truth, and then figure out what we're going to do with it. So, Kieran O'Reilly, you're a man who has spent time as a political prisoner. You also know a fair bit about the US justice system, in particular the conditions that prisoners have faced in the past and may face now, may face in the future. Let's get brave and hear what Julian Assange may face if he is extradited to the US.
Yeah, it's and thanks everyone for coming tonight. It's 10 years ago, as was mentioned, that Julian was first taken into custody on the 7th of December, it's last Monday, and was taken to Wandsworth. And 30 years ago, myself and 3 others made our way into a B-52 base in upstate New York, knowing that B-52s were about to be used in the Gulf War. And we were able to, well, we had to retreat actually because we couldn't get to them. So we went back on New Year's Day and we managed to disable a B-52 bomber and close the runway during a time of mobilisation for war. I just noticed today that B-52s are being deployed to the Middle East as we gather here. And these machines were all made 70 years ago in the 1950s. And they're an indiscriminate weapon of mass destruction, delivering cluster bombs and fuel-air explosives. So we stayed and prayed rather than hit and split, and were arrested and interrogated by the FBI and went to trial in Syracuse, New York, and we didn't get a fair trial at all. And then it was quite interesting too. A lot of legal decisions are very political decisions. Like the Air Force wanted us charged with sabotage, and 2 of our people from the Ploughshares movement were sentenced to 18 years, convicted of an action similar to ours. But the prosecution at the point we were arrested before the war started wasn't confident of securing convictions, and we were charged with criminal damage and conspiracy. So when I was imprisoned in the July of '91, the population in US prisons was, I think it was 1.3 million, and now it's 2.2 million. So it's a huge system. And the federal system, I was actually ironically deported from Alexandria, Virginia at the end, which is where they're trying to extradite Julian to. And Julian is a prisoner of, I think, of the same war, you know, that I was arrested and imprisoned for 30 years ago, and that's the war on the people of Iraq. And it's had different incarnations. The first Gulf War was like a drive-by. It was a war of naval and aerial bombardment where only one side had an air force and a navy. And then the peace movement unfortunately collapsed halfway through that bombardment, and the war changed into the genocidal sanctions. And Madeleine Albright, who was the US ambassador to the UN in 1996, was confronted with the statistic that 500,000 children had died in Iraq because of those sanctions. And she responded with the genocidal phrase, "We think it's worth the price." And then 2003, of course, we had the escalation of invasion and occupation. And all we were asked to do in modern warfare, I think, is to look the other way. They're not conscripting, they're not rationing. And I think that's why WikiLeaks was so timely, because it puts the reality of the war in front of us using evidence supplied by the US military. So Julian will be treated as, as I was being deported actually, I was in prison in Louisiana, and I had a bail hearing, and the Air Force said I was a national security threat. Now, Julian, charged and convicted, if he is convicted of espionage, will be treated very specifically, and he'll be a high security prisoner, and he'll probably be sent to a federal prison called Florence in Colorado Mountains. And that's worth Googling and even reading the Wikipedia on the nature of that place. If you're a prisoner there, you don't see any other prisoners, you don't know what part of the prison you're in, and a former warden described it as a place to drive people insane, basically. And so, you know, he will be put under what they call as SAMs, which is Special Administration Measures, and which is very restrictive on any kind of visits or correspondence with the outside world. And I think it actually compromises client-lawyer confidentiality. That's taken away as well. So it's, you know, it's a place where you're very, very vulnerable. Like I was arrested near the Canadian border, and they put me on Conair, and I ended up doing most of my jail time near the Mexican border in a small town called Pecos. And I'll probably have the opposite in a cage, six cages welded together, and it was very, very high density living. Where Julian will be, I think, put in isolation, and we look at the treatment of Chelsea Manning, who was tortured both in Kuwait, and then in Quantico. So, you know, the prospects aren't good if Julian ends up in prison in the United States, and it's very important that we try and stop that extradition happening.
One of the things that's happened in the last few months is we've seen the election in the US and the fall of the Trump government and Joe Biden due to come in. There was a sneaking sort of hope when Trump was coming in because he had spoken positively about Julian Assange, and that was very quickly diminished as we saw the charges escalate. John, I'm very interested to hear what your reading is of that. Obviously, Joe Biden doesn't have a very good history when it comes to the penal system, but could he be any worse than what we've just seen?
Just as to make it short, and it's not quite as bleak as my last comment, although my last comment is not really bleak because it gives us to understand that together we can change government and insist that they don't embark upon these war crimes. So with Biden, his supporters, you know, six great media platforms. Those media platforms vigorously supported Mr. Trump or President Trump in the 4 years of his reign. In the interregnum, we've been in some contact with his transition team, members of his transition team who are advising on law, and we raised the subject of Julian, and they indicate to us that the DOJ is in such a mess that all of the cases, or a lot of the important cases, will have to be reviewed, and it'll take 6 months to come to Julian's case. That's what that actually, but I wouldn't take that at face value. What it sort of means is that now they are aware, the transition team is aware, because they have a lot to do. Those great media companies that I mentioned will not want a case history of a publication, a publisher and a journalist being arraigned or indicted and convicted or tried and convicted of commentary on classified national security. It will reduce their power and leverage over any government, and they'll reduce their prestige, and they'll be nervous of any government move against them. So that simply won't happen. But it doesn't mean to say that they'll call the case off. What it indicates to us that it won't be pursued in the way that it has been pursued in the past. The next thing is that the prosecutor is a fellow named Kronberg. When Mike Pompeo, head of the CIA, and Jeff Sessions in April 2017 began vigorously putting the case together against Julian, two of the most senior prosecutors in the DOJ refused to take the case and resign. So it's not the, and over the Obama years, as we heard the testimony in the court, the Obama didn't wish the case to be pursued. It was thought to be too embarrassing to the Freedom of Speech Amendment to the American Constitution. So you have inner turmoil within the Department of Justice and the pursuit of the Julian, we have come to believe, emanates solely from the CIA. Yeah, so that, I think, answers the question.
I think, well, Sarah, does that answer your question specifically? Yeah. Well, I'm just wondering, picking up on what you've just said, is it fair enough to say that you think that the real hunt for Julian Assange is actually from the CIA as opposed to from any particular politicians? Is that
Well, without without WikiLeaks, you can only look at patterns. Nobody's going to tell us anything. You know, our government doesn't tell us anything here, and the only reason why we know of the crimes in Afghanistan is from the courage of David McBride. With Andrew Bartlett yesterday, he indicates to me that at each Christmas time, the government uses the opportunity to introduce a raft of the sort of laws that were introduced last week. So, you know, they're not going to tell us. Looking at the patterns, Mike Pompeo, as head of the CIA, gives a speech indicating that Julian is going to be pursued. A week later, Jeff Sessions, as head of the DOJ at the time, says the same thing. And then then we have the resignation of the two top Department of Justice officials from the Obama years, and then the appearance of Kronberg, the first indictment and the superseding indictments. So from that pattern, you can see that at the time Mike Pompeo was head of the CIA, and then he said, I'm going to resign from my post of the Secretary of State and take up Senate seat for Kansas, which indicates to us that he's made a settlement with the CIA and he wants to be in a position in 2024 to stand for president. So that's the only way we can answer your question, is looking at those patterns until Julian gets out and people begin leaking, and you know, we get a deeper understanding of what our government's actually doing.
Okay, well, you've talked about the power of the CIA, the power of the media in the US. We know that in Europe you've managed to rally plenty of support for your son's freedom, particularly, I believe, from the French. I'm wondering about the power of the people in the United States. Sarah and Jai, at the start of tonight's gathering, referred to the Black Lives Matter protests, that we also know that people have been taking to the streets demanding climate change action. What's the sentiment like from ordinary people over in the United States, to the best of your knowledge, when it comes to your son?
Well, on the East Coast, we've got a lot of support. In flyover country, it's hard to judge, there's not so much. On the West Coast, there's some support. The ferment and turmoil in the United States is organised, and for example, Black Lives Matter had a grant of $120 million from the Ford Foundation. Equally, they had another $80 million grant from Open Society. So, you know, it's not possible to use those elements to measure that ferment, to measure the potential for support for Julian. But at the highest level of government in the Biden transition team, we have some access and are very limited, but they know we are there. And I don't think in the United States, going by the last 4 years, what the people think and feel matters to the administrations. They just have complete control over the propaganda apparatus and manage, for example, everybody in the United States now contemplates their elders succumbing to a disease. It's a great worry, and it supersedes concerns about Julian. I hope that's a comprehensive answer.
Now, I'm just taking this opportunity to give you a bit of a heads up. We're 1 or 2 questions away from opening it up to the audience. So have a little think about questions you might like to ask to our 3 panellists. And also take note of this red bucket, because it will be making its way around the room, and you have the opportunity to donate to help support the cause as we go along. Back over to you, Mia.
I want to come back home now to Australia and just mention again, there are 24 members of a cross-parliamentary group of federal MPs. There are 2 members of the coalition in that group, George Christensen and Barnaby Joyce. Sadly, none of the members were able to make it in this evening. Apparently, they're all quite exhausted after sitting in federal parliament for the past couple of weeks. But I do have here a statement from Andrew Wilkie. He's the independent member for Clark down in Tasmania, and he founded the group, so he has emailed this to me. He says, Julian Assange is a genuine hero, and the way he's being treated by the US, UK and Australian governments is unconscionable and illogical. The substantive matter remains that he is a publisher and journalist who has always acted in the public interest, and nowhere is that clearer than the way in which WikiLeaks revealed hard evidence of US war crimes. Frankly, he should be lauded as a hero, not a villain. The UK government should never have entertained the idea of extradition to the US, and the Australian government should never have gone along for the ride. But of course it turned out that London and Canberra care more about kowtowing to Washington than they do about protecting an Australian citizen who has never been found guilty of any offence, but instead includes a Walkley Award among the many recognitions of his efforts to simply do the right thing. I'm sorry I can't be there with you in some more tangible way, but you can count on me and at least some of my parliamentary colleagues to continue to take every opportunity to campaign for Julian's freedom and return to Australia. I hope the event goes well. John Shipton, they're really great words from Andrew Wilkie, and it's wonderful that we have 24 federal MPs who have put their names on the list in that group in support of Julian's freedom. Does it mean anything more than that for you?
Oh, that's, it's very strong. And all of these elements of an incoming tide, which, had it not been for COVID, would be in spate now. We would have overwhelmed the British government. But just a couple of weeks ago, the Senate passed a resolution. So the Labor Party, for reasons of its own, probably electoral, and the swelling support amongst us for Julian, voted to support the man, and I would like to count as a friend. So you could see, what else can I tell you? Boris Johnson, everybody thinks of him as a clever, clever buffoon. But there's a bit more to it. In 2006, as a member of Parliament, David Birmingham was facing, they're known as the NatWest 3, facing extradition. Johnson fought vigorously against that. He failed. Next, as a mayor, Gary McKinnon faced extradition to the United States. Gary is an interesting young man who has tremendous computer skills, but he believes in UFOs. And everybody knows that all the information about UFOs is held by the Pentagon. So he hacked into the Pentagon's computers, and the Pentagon decided that they didn't like that and wanted to take Gary away. Well, as mayor, that they successfully defended Gary against extradition. The next was Laurie Love. Laurie, just a light-hearted moment. The court papers, I've seen them, were Love versus the United States and the United States versus Love. So that was a successful resistance, and Mr. Johnson was neutral in that. In Prime Minister's Question Time, in April this year, the last question from Jeremy Corbyn as opposition leader concerned Julian and the extradition treaty. Mr. Johnson didn't mention Julian in his reply, unlike, say, Mr. Morrison, who said, oh, he's got to face the music. So Mr. Johnson didn't mention Julian, so that's neutral, and made critical observation on the extradition treaty that exists between the United States and UK. So, yeah, some solid movement there. There's a few other items. So that David Davis, who's a Tory MP, he leads the fight against the extradition treaty as it's presently constructed between the UK and the US, and Secoulas. Sorry, let's mention it the other way around. Harry Dunn is a young man who was run over by Anne Secoulas. Anne Secoulas was an American CIA spy, and she was immediately whipped out of the country, and some inquiry was made by the UK as to extradite Anne back to the United Kingdom to face trial. And the US said, well, jump in the lake, you know, she's not coming. So they have that to deal with. Just one other fact, there's just a little over 100 extraditions from England to the United States each year, and there's about just under 12 to 14 the other way around. So the extradition treaty is a terrible problem. Over the last I'm getting a bit long on this, but over the last 10 years, the United States has rewritten all of its extradition treaty with anybody that would rewrite them. Ours is particularly poor. And those extradition treaties are used to judicially abduct people that the United States, for whatever reason, wishes to. So you have Meng Wanzhou, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Huawei, and Huawei has some 5G secrets that the United States wants, so she's held hostage. You have the extradition request against Mike Lynch. Mike Lynch is an IT genius, billionaire Englishman. He's under threat of extradition older bin, another IT. Anyway, you get the idea. That's what the extradition treaty is used for by the United States, is to harvest those that it doesn't like or uses hostage to gather for itself technical information that's very valuable. Thank you.
Now, we started there with a little bit about the unlikely benefits that have come together in the Australian government, and luckily that group's gone from 11 to 21 since this time last year, but still, or 24, still abysmal, really. David, I'm interested, given that you would have seen the interaction between the legal system and politics and many issues, about your reading of that and what you would have liked to see, or why that's been so poor. Greg Barnes says, the welcome release of Iranian prisoner Kylie Moore-Gilbert, ironically a relative of Julian, tells us that when the Australian government wants to, it can successfully negotiate the release of its citizens from detention in other countries. Having achieved success with Kylie Moore-Gilbert, Foreign Minister Maurice Payne must now speak with her UK and US counterparts about ensuring Assange is being able to walk out of Belmarsh prison for good. Why is this not happening?
I think in the continuum of Australians in trouble overseas, there's the we don't actually give a shit, all the way through to we really, really care and we're going to do something about it. And in that continuum, there are a few signals. Where's Anthony Albanese? Where's Penny Wong? Where is Tanya Plibersek? Where are the front benches? Where's the Prime Minister? Where's the Minister for Justice? Where are these people? That is a sign on the continuum we actually don't give a shit, as opposed to Kylie Moore-Gilbert, we really, really want to get this woman out of the clutches of these people. And I think that it is, of course, I think it's utterly appalling that both the Labor Party frontbenchers and the government frontbenchers are leaving it to, and what is the characteristic of those 24? The characteristic of the 24 who are speaking up for Julian is none of them are in power and none of them are on the front bench of either of the major parties. So there is a political curse on those who stand up for Julian, and that needs to be broken. And the only way that can be broken is by us, the people, speaking to our local members and making it perfectly clear that this is utterly unacceptable. He's an Aussie guy. He deserves our support. He should be home, and you should start speaking up for him, rather than hiding behind the curtain of the United States, hiding behind some sense of political impropriety by speaking out for someone who has embarrassed our government as well in terms of its role in the Iraq War. So I think on that continuum, we are still in, actually, we really don't give a shit. And that's the signal. That's the signal to the POMs. That's the signal to the Yanks. We actually really don't care too much. And it's appalling. And if as much attention was given to Julian, let's make it clear. Kylie Moore-Gilbert was swapped for terrorists. They sent them from a third country over there to get her out. That's the level of Australia's commitment to her. And great work. I'm all in favour of it. But what's wrong with applying the same amount of attention to Julian? I saw the Prime Minister's words with Kylie Moore-Gilbert, and it couldn't have been clearer that the whole of the government and the whole of the opposition were in favour. That's not the case with Julian, and the only way we can make it the case is by us.
Could I just add, from my personal experience with the Australian Diplomatic Service, is that when we came to sentencing in New York, we went to jail in the same spirit that we went into the action, and as we approached the court, we actually occupied the military recruitment centre in the federal building and read out statistics of how many children had been killed since our action, and and the time we'd come to sentencing, we went into a courtroom that contained 100 people, and as the judge was sentencing us, our support got up and said, you know, you're about to criminalise peacemaking and legitimise massacre. And in that, 100 people were thrown out of the court by the FBI and the court ushers. And I remember the door opening once everyone had been thrown out and 3 guys in suits being ushered in. And I turned to the court official and I said, who are those guys? And they said, oh, they're from the Australian Embassy. So they'd been there the whole morning, hadn't come up and said, we're here to make sure you're treated correctly as a fellow Australian citizen. They just hung out with the FBI. And I think that's their attitude that, you know, same with David Hicks, myself, Julian, that if you're in political trouble with the United States, they're going to hang you out to dry. You're probably going to get more support if you get busted for smack in Thailand from them, you know. And that comes to a deep spiritual problem in this country, is that we find security in serving empire. And we send our young men and women to kill and to die in useless American and British wars, from Vietnam to Iraq to Afghanistan. We've got our Air Force bombing Syria. And that goes right through our history, back to putting down a Maori uprising, to Sudan, to World War I. And that's where you don't find security there. You find security in peace and justice and reconciliation with the Indigenous people. And, you know, the same reason we waste, and now we've got so many coming back from these wars, committing suicide, domestic violence, etc. And it's in that same spirit that they abandoned someone like Julian Assange, you know. And, you know, that Gillard was willing to hand him over and pronounce without any due process that he was guilty of a crime when he was first detained in England. Just shows you that. And as the previous person said, the pressure has come from the streets, from the people, and if there's enough pressure, the politicians will follow.
So if you have any questions, I'd love it if you could make your way to one of those 2 microphones. If you're a little shorter, I'd go to the one at the front. The one at the back looks a little bit for tall people. And you're ready to go?
Yeah.
If you could just say your name and whereabouts you live before you ask the question, and who you're directing the question to, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Pratima, and I live in Myocum. And this is for John and Kieran, really. Very simple question. How is Julian now? What is his circumstances, and how is he feeling?
One of the privileges of age, thank you. I'm not allowed into the prison anymore because I'm too old. The prison thinks that I'll get COVID and die and then come back and sue them. It's ridiculous. But I speak to Julian about once a week. He gets a 10-minute phone call. And there's a complex procedure that the lawyers have to deposit money in a fund, and that fund is used up, and then there's another procedure to deposit money, and there has to be the lawyers and so on. But he does get frequent 10-minute phone calls to Stella, and that helps greatly. Yeah. So he can speak to Stella for 10 minutes, and then has to wait another 10 minutes, and then he can ring back. So that works out really well. When Stella's phone runs out of battery or something, I get lots of calls.
And for those who don't know, who's Stella?
Stella is Julian's partner and mother of those 2 lovely boys you can see in the photographs. Yeah. Because there's over 50 cases of COVID in the jail and 15 staff, they have the same internal lockdown. And so the prisoners spending in their cells has increased, and the opportunity for association has consequently decreased. But He's, actually, you know, to be accurate, Julian is an ailing 49-year-old man who has had 10 years of psychological torture, arbitrary detention, and ongoing detention as an innocent man at the risk of COVID in the jail. That's what is properly. But, you know, unrelieved, awkward news has to be spiced with the brilliance of the human spirit. And so the calls to Stella elevate above the suffering, okay? And he records, so he can't see his children, so Stella records on the phone a message, you know, and then plays the message back. So through, as you all know, through the application of love, you elevate yourself above the torment that sometimes comes to the doorstep.
Vivian question from New Brighton. My question is directed to David Halpin and to John Shipton. Thanks to David McBride, the Brereton report recently revealed that 39 Afghani civilians were killed by Australian soldiers. Do you believe that Australia's acceptance that these crimes occurred and the fact revealed to the public will assist in convincing the Australian government to bring Julian home?
I don't know, but I certainly hope so. Yes, I don't know, but I certainly hope so. I have thought about this. You know, what is the impact on the Australian public of the 39 naming and soon to be, hopefully, prosecutions for war crimes? And perhaps reinforce the disgraceful nature of our involvement there, and that we shouldn't have been there, that we all marched in the street against it, and that we were right, and that Julian was right to disclose other war crimes in this same fashion. I mean, imagine if that... The reason I think it really should impact is, imagine if the whistleblowers, those brave souls who blew the whistle on those who committed war crimes, were themselves being locked up and were themselves about to be imprisoned for the rest of their lives for daring to disclose information that they gained either first-hand or second-hand of war crimes committed by Australians. There seems to me to be precious little difference between those war criminals, between those whistleblowers and Julian. And I think if we can write and speak and promote that connection, then it could have an impact. So I certainly hope so.
Thank you. John, can we hear your opinion?
In the circumstances of David's brave work and Julian's, gathered and held in a singular moment, the Australian government looks pretty shabby despite its work for Kylie Moore-Gilbert. Looks pretty shabby, and there's an easy way out for them. One is to drop the charges against David McBride and proceed to examine the circumstances of the deaths of those people, unlawful deaths, murders in Afghanistan. The other is to participate in moving Julian to Geneva, where he has the offer of a humanitarian visa, as they have specialist hospitals there that have experienced medical staff who who know how to treat torture victims. So this is an opportune moment for a shabby government, a shabby-looking government, no longer has the coherent support of its polity. So the exercise of power has to change from covert, that is convincing us to obey these rules because we see the government as an upstanding, to overt. So police powers and insistences and arrests and knocking down doors of journalists and harassing the ABC and introducing rafts of laws that on Christmas Eve that every lawyer in Australia... I ring up Stephen Kenny yesterday. He said, "Oh, this is shocking, they've done it again." That we have now a set of laws in Australia that are the most, if used, oppressive in the Western world. So that's the circumstances that the government faces. To be covert, and that is to have the body of us helping the government institute its regulations, laws and policies that percolate up through us, or become overt and knock on doors and harass journalists and introduce ridiculous laws at midnight. Well, so in that sense, I think that the wisdom in the government will use this occasion to help bring Julian home, and it'll bring them a lot of popularity, and again, we'll support their policies. So, sorry about that. It sounds like I'm standing for Parliament. I'm not.
Oh, go on. Our next question.
My name's Vivian Stott. I live near Federal. Could I please ask John Shipton if you can give us any idea of what sort of verdict this Judge Baritza is likely to render, and what exactly is her background?
Judge Baritza is an academic who migrated to the United Kingdom with her family from South Africa some years ago, like the similar migrations from South Africa to Australia, you know, the verdict at the last day in deciding upon deciding to give the defence 4 weeks to prepare their final submission. Judge Baritza did canvass the matter of the American election influencing her. She just canvassed it in the way of saying, well, then we have November 4th and the American election. She didn't go any further with it. So that will be a consideration of hers, and if the logical exposition, logical, it may not have been logical, if the reasoning that I've given earlier on in the talk applies, then Mr. Baritza will say no extradition. However, she may want to negotiate for herself a seat on the High Court. She will do as she's asked. That's what I imagine.
And Sean, if she did rule not to extradite him, what?
The United States will immediately appeal, is the thought that Julian's lawyers have. The United States. So Julian, there's also a thing that you might, I mean, it's ironic that Julian's visa expired to the United Kingdom some 7 years ago. So they could put him on a plane and he would get off at Perth. Yeah.
Let's hope that's. Let's all hope that's what happens. Next question from the audience.
Yeah, my name's Adrian. I live in Mullumbimby, and I'd like to start by offering an answer to David's rhetorical question about where is Albo, where is Penny Wong, where is Mark Dreyfus, where is the rest of them? I think one of the things we need to realise in dealing with this whole issue is that we are essentially a one-party state on many, many issues, and this is one of them. And we are not American allies, we are American vassals. So we need, the question I want to come to is whether there might be another left field tangential approach to this, which I've spoken to a few friends about and advocated a bit. And that is to try to appeal to Trump in his way out the back door of the White House. One of the unconstrained, or the American president, as we know, has several unconstrained powers. One of them, of course, is to bomb anywhere he feels like bombing, to make war against anybody, because, I mean, essentially the American state now thrives on war. The other unconstrained power that he enjoys is to offer pardons. And it's occurred to me that Trump's a very unusual character, and that it might be worth appealing directly to him to see whether Julian could be simply given a pardon. Now, there are points on which Trump could be appealed to, particularly the fact that Julian helped to win for Trump the 2016 election by leaking Hillary Clinton's emails, and hope that we might have that the Democrats will exercise a more humane approach, I think, should be balanced against the recognition that they will be wanting vengeance for the loss in 2016. Trump has gone on and on about the fact that the Democrats are, crooks, the election was rigged, it was all fraud and so on. So a basis of appeal to Trump might be to say, by giving a pardon to Julian, you would be able to enjoy a little bit of spite and vengeance against the Democrats in advance, as it were. So Donald Trump is easy to write to. You can go onto a website called Call or Write to the White House, or Call and Write the White House, or something like that. And there's an email form that pops up, and you can send him an email, or alternatively, you can look up the address and simply send him a snail mail letter and appeal that for his own self-interest, he might get some pleasure out of pardoning Julian Assange. Just an idea.
Could I just check on the legal stuff with that, David Halpern? I mean, if we were to ask for a pardon, does that inherently mean that you're confessing to have broken the law?
No, you can get a pardon without it. And I mean, I think the truth is that one point of correction, I don't think it's correct to say that Julian Assange leaked the material to the Trump campaign. I think it's more accurate to say they published leaked material. And I think the difference is important because Julian Assange was not the leaker. They were the recipient of the leaks. Having said that, there are moves afoot to lobby the president. And I think that's probably... Do you want to say more?
Well, I've written to President Trump via Rand Paul's Chief of Staff a letter asking him, suggesting that, you know, he may go to heaven if he pardons Julian. Well, along the lines of the questioners, yeah. But I can't say the things that he said, you know, it's great advantage. It'll get up the nose of your enemies. I say things like it would be a great advantage to him to pardon Julian, and the Nobel Peace Prize Committee would look favourably. So,
Stroke his ego, tickle his tummy, do all the things.
Could I say, just to broaden out the beginning of that question about where are these people, I think if you march against war, what you have to realise is that you're inciting others to non-violently resist, you know, and or journalists or people in the military to whistle-blow or to put their weapons down. Now, I was the longest-serving imprisoned resistor of the first Gulf War in the United States. I did 13 months, but there were over 200 US military who did 6 months to 6 years. And they were largely abandoned by a peace movement, which asked them not to go, you know. And I'm sure when Chelsea Manning was being court-martialed, many of the soldiers who were looking at their second or third redeployment to Iraq or Afghanistan were looking at the Chelsea Manning case and thinking, how much support is Chelsea getting from the peace movement or from civil society? And I'm sure many of these Labor Party people marched against the war in 2003 or used the war as a marketing opportunity for their party, you know, like many NGOs did. But if you're seriously anti-war and you incite people, you're really morally obligated to accompany them through the courts or their hospitalisation or imprisonment. And you know, as an anti-war activist, if we could stop these wars that march against the war, we're going to go to prison on resistance or whistleblowing or publishing. And the other 99% don't all have to go to jail, but supported those imprisoned resistors, whether they be military or civilian. And you know, Julian is really, as Chelsea is, as you know, we're all, you know, in this part of the empire, born in a privilege. All we must do is look the other way, not hear the screams. And when Chelsea didn't look the other way in Baghdad and released this information, and WikiLeaks published it, they really began to be people very much like us, born at the centre of empire, beginning to suffer very much like the Iraqis and the Afghanis. And that's heroic, you know, and that needs to be accompanied and celebrated. And what we get from the Labor Party and what we get from these politicians is cynicism and cheap shots and character assassination, which at its root is deeply, deeply cowardly, you know, and that's what they are. When confronted with the empire, they are cowards, you know. Whether it be Penny Wong or whether it be Scott Morrison. And you know, it is, you know, I think when I think of Julian, I think of another Queensland-born journalist, Greg Shackleton, who was killed in East Timor. And I think of how he was abandoned and the other 4 who died with him by journalists in Australia that didn't keep his memory alive. And you know, it's a privilege to inhabit the same space as these people, and we need as best we can with whatever gifts we're given to accompany them.
Just following on from that, you talk there about how the government has abandoned Julian Assange and the different ways that the government can respond. Do you think that was due to the level of embarrassment that he caused or the success of the smear campaign and attaching him to those allegations of sexual assault and making him almost untouchable to some politicians?
I think when the revelations occurred, they feared the worst, that, you know, there might be a revival of the anti-war movement, that these lies have been exposed and things will collapse. And unfortunately, that didn't occur, you know, in retrospect. I think there's a deep motivation of vengeance, of taking it very, very personally by people like Clinton and and Pompeo, etc. I don't think Donald Trump or Boris Johnson's emotionally invested in imprisoning Julian Assange for the rest of his life. I think there are other players, and the CIA, etc., who are.
But our politicians, why they're not? Why our Penny Wongs and Tanya Plibersek?
In the face of the United States, they're cowards, you know. And the reason why China could allow, you know, China's attitude to Edward Snowden was, we don't want to give you asylum, we don't want to lock you up. There's the door, leave, you know. And China could do that because they're an independent country, for better or for worse. Britain can't do it because they're not an independent country. They're an aircraft carrier for the United States. You know, most people in Britain opposed British involvement in this war under Blair. And, you know, the sycophancy in relation to the US in this country, you know, and in Ireland and in England is pretty outrageous. You know.
Very much so. Philip Adams, you've played a big role in helping raise awareness around this. It'd be great to get an update from you around how your end of the campaign has been going.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Philip Adams. I'm the third largest petition since Federation. It's been tabled to free Julian Assange and no extradition. It's been tabled in the House of Reps and by Andrew Wilkie, and has been tabled in the Senate by Peter Whish-Wilson. I think it's the largest petition ever tabled in both houses, and it's certainly the largest e-petition. It's never rated a mention on mainstream media. No ABC comment, nothing. It's purely organically grown. I do thank Bay FM, they've mentioned it. So I've heard a lot about, you know, it's up to us. It's not up to politicians now, and it's not even up to Julian's family. It's up to the citizens to stand up and take this to a higher court. We've heard about the United Nations, and these protocols have been put in place for individuals and citizens to take this to a higher court. And that's what the petition is doing right now. I've submitted to the Chief Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court a request for a preliminary investigation into the public officers of 4 nations, Ecuador, United Kingdom, Australia and Sweden. They're all ratified nations to the International Criminal Court. The United States is not. And the psychological torture that's already been determined by the UN Special Rapporteur on torture, Professor Nils Melzer, that determination, by the way, comes directly under crimes against humanity in the International Criminal Courts under the 4 crimes that they can prosecute. So, just to keep it short, if the decision goes negative on the 4th of January, something as a nobody, I would now have this petition and I can email 541,000 signatories. We will be priming to direct our focus onto the International Criminal Court because it's already been determined he's been psychologically tortured. Mental torture comes directly under crimes against humanity. This is out of order. And I personally believe the Brereton report is a knee-jerk reaction to the International Criminal Court's listing of Afghanistan investigation. The way the International Criminal Court works is they allow the local jurisdiction to conduct their own investigation. There's been no investigation or follow-up into the Assange psychological torture, even though they've been issued 41 notices by the petition, stating to every single over the copies confirmation of delivery to 226 parliamentarians. Nothing's happened. So now it's time to take it to a higher court, and that's what the petition has done. So I encourage you, the name of the petition is Free Julian Assange Before It's Too Late. You Google Free Julian Assange petition, it'll come up. My name's Philip Adams, not the journalist, I'm just an individual. Right? So just look out there'll be, I'll speak to some people, we'll develop a link to automatically populate emails to send to the International Criminal Court subsequent to any negative decision. Obviously, I'm very hopeful. I think we've got an opportunity here that will get him out, particularly in the interim period. It's my feeling, at no man's land. But anyway, that's it. You know who I am, and there are individuals that are doing something, and it's not up to politicians. It's up to us now. Okay.
So one last question from the audience.
How do you do? My name's Andrew Bock. John, I met you in Rome when you were gallantly talking to Roman politicians to get a coalition of crossbench and parliamentary support for Julian Assange, and succeeded, I might add, in the hotbed of Roman politics. I wanted to thank you for bringing messages of human rights to the world, around the world, so graciously and patiently and intelligently. And I just wondered if you might update us on which countries or what some of the latest institutions and or countries and or parliaments had given Julian support, and perhaps to end where you thought we as Australians might best devote our political energies.
Gee, it's good to, I mean, we hang around after we finish or say hello.
Yes, of course.
It's good to see you.
Yeah.
We met just outside the Roman Parliament. There's a big square, and there were people with cello playing Bach cantatas, you know, and there's a coffee shop and the Romans swishing by, and we go in to the meeting room upstairs, and there's these politicians. I was going to say, you know, older men, but I'm older than all of them. Anyway, and they open the windows and Bach wafts in, and we how do we say, hammer out a statement of support for Julian. That was the circumstances that we met in. The Italians are doing a few things. COVID, of course, is a big problem from them, but they're professors at the University of Rome are putting together a webinar, well, it was a meeting, now it's a webinar, on the legal circumstances of Julian, and they have drawn in people, professors of law from all over Europe. Nils Melzer is doing a book which is due out about March, and a film. Craig Murray's preparing a book, and that's due out about March, about appeal time. The Austrian government, we went and saw. I work with a German lady, as Savim Dagdalen. She's a member of the Bundestag for the Die Linke, so about like the Labour Party. But she's well balanced, so she understands that you've got to travel along the centre if you want to get anything done. So we went down to Austria and had a chat there, and the Austrian government, in their wisdom, very fine, issued a statement of support. Then we went and saw a couple of other people, and the Swiss Federation's chair of their Human Rights Committee issued a report, a supporting report. And we went back to Berlin and managed, Savin put together Sigmar Gabriel. Sigmar Gabriel is an ex-foreign minister, but a very significant foreign minister, and Germany. The Julian's lawyer a French lawyer, he's now Minister for Justice in France in the Macron government. So, you know, I can fill the evening of the Podemos, which is the governing governing party in Spain. They're supportive, and their spokesperson last week at the Human Rights Film Festival in Barcelona did a webinar with me and a couple of others. So in Europe, it's their own self-interest, which prompts them to continue to unify and insist that a European publication staffed by Europeans, published in Europe through European publications like The Spiegel and so on, which have been nominated tonight, it's in their own self-interest to ensure that this oppression and intimidation and judicial abduction stops. And so they're quite strong on it. But I think there's a bit too much to, you know, it'll be a deluge of this and that and this and that. But I can say that even the Swedish Parliament, I did a protest in Stockholm. Can you believe 550 Stockholm people marched down the street, free Julian, and things that the battery, and they have two wheels. The police led the parade, get out of the way, and down, off we went. So in Oslo it was the same, in Dublin, the support there amongst Dubliners is vociferous. They give the English very short, swift. They're saying squabbles in the Scottish National Parliament at the moment, but they're supportive. In England, there's a slow movement to support Julian. It's mostly on the left, and of necessity, we must go to the right because the right have the power. You know, there's a Tory government, so I have to lick the legs of the Tories. It's quite unnatural for me.
I did notice, though, that Votland, which is like the right-wing in Norway, wrote positively about Julian Assange. So the right's coming round, hopefully more and more. Look, we're coming to the end of the evening. I'm going to give everyone an opportunity to... Oh, there's one more question? Two more questions. Sorry, I thought we were...
Hi, Lyndall from Kingscliff. So thank you all for coming.
And thanks for coming down from Kingscliff on this rainy night.
Oh, yes. It only came to me by reading the Nimbin paper. There was an article in the front page about human rights. This question for anybody. We're the only democratic country in the Western world or something that doesn't have an actual Bill of Rights. I'm just wondering how, if people are generally aware of that here, because it's absolutely appalling. I don't know how, because we can all get screwed over. Basically, we've got no human rights.
No freedom of speech.
The UN thing, the article that I read in the Nimbin paper said it's not legally binding, but as signatory, we're meant to uphold it. But Australia's just never actually enacted anything. And I did get an opportunity to speak to a human rights lawyer, Justice Michael Kirby. He gave a speech in Armidale when I was living there. And I asked him if he thought if we had one, would it protect us from violations of our human rights, which is happening all the time in this country by our governments to particular people, can be picked on. So, and he thought that it could. So I just wondered if that was anything that anyone here who's concerned about think would help or is related to it. And also just wondering how many lawyers there are in this country that have the guts to stand up and be part of this fight to bring Julian back, because I'm just so sick of this country being so damn gutless with everything, with what you were saying, Julian's father, about in Dublin, they stood up and they supported it, and there's Irish people here, there's Scottish people here. Why the hell are we just bowing to England and America, and what the hell is going on here? Yep.
Could I just, I can answer, would rather have David answer the first part, but the second part about lawyers supporting, if it was for the lawyers, Julian would be out. The support amongst lawyers is just thick, determined and firm. The law, and if the journalists over the years had been as firm and strong as the lawyers, then Julian would be home.
I'm happy to. I was just going to say, lawyers need to be cautious too. Let's not forget Bernard Collaery, who had the gall to actually legally represent a whistleblower, for which he's facing a secret trial, his incarceration for his role. He's the ex-Attorney General of the ACT, and he is being prosecuted in a secret trial, a closed trial, for acting for a whistleblower over East Timor's over the bugging. So they're picking off the journalists, then they're picking off the lawyers, and it's like the old saying, who will they come for next?
But would a Bill of Rights help if Australia had?
A Bill of Rights would help, of course. America has one. So let's not pretend that it's a. Of course, we should have a Bill of Rights, and the law societies around Australia have been calling for them for generations. Yes, it would help.
And how would one go about making that happen? I think that was the root of the question was, what can we do to get the government to...
There's two kinds of Bills of Rights. The first are those made by parliaments, and the second of those are those that are in the Constitution. And it is the latter that we need, because otherwise, whatever. It needs to be constitutional, and that can only happen in a referendum, and that requires a majority of people in the majority of states, and it's not going to happen in my lifetime.
There was one last question from the audience.
Lottie from Tweed Heads. I like your imagery of following the empire. COVID this year has unveiled many failings in our systems. One of them was mentioned on Q&A, that as we don't have protections for people overseas because we're from overseas, we were either dragged here or whatever here. So Australia government hadn't built up support for people overseas, how to help them, what to do. Would that help at all, or our foreign policies like COVID couldn't get people out of other countries? Where here we don't have strong support for Australians overseas in the law. Would that help at all? That's my query.
Look, I think the failure to bring people back overseas is symbolic. Matthias Cormann flying around in the meantime is symbolic, and Julian sitting in the cells is symbolic, and it's all part of the same disease. And that is exactly what Prince said, and that is the empire, the crawling to the United States, and the cultural cringe that says that our people overseas aren't as important as anyone else. And I see it as part of the same thing. I think you're spot on.
Can I ask a very quick question? Does Julian actually want to come to Australia above anywhere else?
So for anyone who couldn't hear that, does Julian want to come to Australia above anywhere else to secure release? I think that one's for you, John.
This is his home. His mum's here, which mothers are an important part of your life, I think. And his two other children are here. His brother, two brothers actually are here. I mean, of course he wants to return. He went to school down the road, born in Townsville. And roots are important.
So as we wrap up tonight, I thought I'll give you all a chance to share something. I know, Mayor, you must value your role in independent media. What do you see as ways that people can engage and help raise awareness of things that you can do yourself? Sorry to turn it on you without any prior warning.
Yes. Okay, so, well, as a journalist, I'm doing the best I can, given limited resources in a community radio. If you want to help get that message out as far and wide as we can do, and thanks again to our friends from North Coast Events. They've been live streaming the whole thing tonight. That means that there's going to be a recording. We'll be able to share links to that recording far and wide on social media. So, yeah, one way that you can help independent media is with your money. I think subscribing to FM, I worked out, costs about the price of a carton of craft beer per year. We just had our radiothon, and we're very grateful. We had more people than last year subscribed, so that was great. We've also got our friends at the Echo who have also supported this evening. I'm hoping, is Aslan here still? She was going to be coming. She's one of the co-editors of the Echo. And and also a shout out to the Nimbin Good Times. That's the publication that one of the members of the audience was referring to before. That's how she found out about tonight, all the way from Kingscliff. Fantastic. So I've just named 3 independent media bodies. We do have others.
Could I just say something?
Yes, of course you can.
When I found out about this being on, I rang the Richmond River, whatever it's called these days, and I rang...
Richmond River Express.
Yeah, the one that used to be, the one that's on now. And I also rang the Northern Rivers Times, I think it's called. I told them both about it. That's all.
I think you rang me as well.
Well done. Well done. The Northern Star, for its part,
Thank you.
also included coverage of John Shipton's tour. Sorry.
The papers that were printed didn't have anything.
Okay, the print, yes. Well, that's a challenge, isn't it? Now that we've got a lot of the regional newspapers that are owned by Murdoch are now online only. We've got paywalls. Well, we could talk all night about the trouble with media, ownership, censorship. Yeah, that's right. And that's part of this, what has brought us here tonight anyway, isn't it, really? So you're asking what do I think people can do and what do I think journalists can do? We just really have to do as much as we can to stand up for truth and democracy, and that means using the best of our abilities to try to find out what's going on and to speak to the people who are involved, like John Shipton, the father of the man who is in jail right now over in London, like a former magistrate who's got the legal expertise to answer some of our more difficult questions, and like Kieran O'Reilly, who has been advocating for democracy for decades and has put his own life, and no doubt his family's lives, at some risk, I imagine. I mean, certainly psychological risk there to have someone in your family locked up in a jail in the US. I think that's the best I can do to answer the questions. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, I just wanted to cut this is going, but perhaps you can hear me. My name's Roy Drew. I've left the address. We have a local Facebook page called Northern Rivers New South Wales for Assange that I set up. It's
got about 150 odd members at the moment. It's an open thing. Taking people want to join up and post that, they're great. I left that's that strip on the seats. I've also been involved with a group from Melbourne and Sydney, setting up a website called the Assange Freedom Network, which is essentially, it's a work in progress, but it is live, essentially acting, it's a directory of groups around Australia and around the world. So
Thank you so much.
So you can check your local group and you can see what other groups are doing, what's going on in the world, and so on. And just the last thing, there's a new book came out, was launched last Thursday week, called A Secret History, and it's WikiLeaks exposés in Australia, 18 contributors, and I'm into the first chapter is Jen Robinson, which is fantastic, full of insight. That's his lawyer, obviously. The second one is, I think his name is Keith Tadner, who older hands will know, is a journalist who's worked with Desmond Ball on security, and you want to know more about what, well, first Jen Robinson, the contributions Julian has made to journalism, and the using it, you will know me, the technology and so on, and Keith Tadner's exposés about the Empire intelligence and communications network that WikiLeaks has exposed and has driven them crazy. And that's what they're doing. That's their resistance against, blind resistance to shut Julian up and anybody else who wants to step into his shoes.
Thank you so much for sharing all that information.
Sorry, I just wanted to add there as well, sorry, Sarah. I just realised that if you don't have money... Oh, sorry. I've interrupted you.
It's called A Secret Australia.
Oh, A Secret Australia. Yeah? Okay. Great. I should have mentioned earlier too that if you are financially strapped and that's not the best way that you can help, but you can use your own skills to help out you certainly to help out community radio. We're always taking volunteers and people who might want to, mentor is one thing you can do. And also you can learn, you can be part of the community newsroom. We've got plenty of people with experience, as myself. I've got mentors who've more experience than I do. We're qualified to share the skills. Dr. John Jiggins has been interviewing John Shipton for quite a few years now, and those interviews have been played on Bay FM, so he's there to help give support and advice. People interested in getting involved in Bay FM or community newsroom in particular, please come see me after this event.
Very good idea. I did 10 years there myself, and it's an incredible place to be involved with. Kyron, some final parting words?
Yeah, okay. I guess I got my last haircut in Boggaroo Jail in 1988. I just did a recent tour of the remains of that place. And I guess my experiences in Darwin prison and in Limerick and in Texas and Louisiana and Oklahoma and New York. What sustains a prisoner, I think, is one's spirituality and the solidarity of others. And your spirituality is very subjective, and having encountered Julian incarcerated in the embassy over those years, he has a very strong spirit and he has a very strong sense of who he is and the work he's doing and the significance of that. And I draw a lot of nourishment and to continue the struggle for justice and peace on the outside from Julian's resoluteness while he's incarcerated, and a couple of my friends are being sentenced, are being imprisoned in the United States for anti-nuclear activity this Monday. And as a prisoner, you draw nourishment from the sense of what you're doing in the place you are at, from brothers and sisters on the outside continuing the struggle for peace and justice. So it's very important to write to prisoners and share news of that struggle continuing. And it's also interesting, with both resistance and solidarity, it comes from the most unsuspected places. Like I ran into George Christensen in the street in Brisbane, and he just returned from visiting Julian with Andrew Wilkie. And he said, while they were waiting for Julian to be brought out, another prisoner who was out for a visit realised why they were there and began speaking out loudly and advocating for Julian. And, you know, speaking out loudly and advocating for anyone while you're incarcerated is a real high-risk activity. And I know from my own experiences in prison that, and in hospital as well, if you're in either of those institutions, you really need a lot of advocacy. And I know when I expect to do my jail time in the northeast playing bocce ball with the mafia in some kind of federal penitentiary like Danbury, and all of a sudden I was shanghaied on Con Air, hit Oklahoma and landed in El Paso, then driven up to Pecos. And the first month was very, very difficult. I was getting lightly assaulted, harassed by guards, many who were military, even the National Guard or were veterans of Vietnam and Iraq. And what's really saved me was the amount of correspondence I received. As soon as that came in after about 3 or 4 weeks, the staff immediately began to back off because they know you have some kind of reach on the outside. And then I got popular with Mexican stamp collectors and built my base from there. and I think it's, Julian has, what I've observed and heard secondhand, that he's doing the jail time as best as he can and living a life while incarcerated, just like Chelsea Manning did for 7 years, thinking she was doing 35, And these are great, two people who inhabit our time, who inhabited our movement, for those of us who oppose the war, that we can draw great nourishment from, but also bring great nourishment to through our small acts of creative solidarity.
My final thought is this. I'm thinking of myself sitting at home in my Oakham, and in the mailbox comes a whole pile of documents, and those documents shed light on a grave injustice committed by a powerful person or country. What do? Do I throw it in the bin? Do I sit on it? Or do I distribute it to ensure that it sees the light of day? I hope that if that situation ever occurred, I would have the guts and courage to do that, the latter. So for me, the reason I'm here and the reason I'm obsessed is because I feel that we owe Julian a debt. We owe him because he did something and continues to do something incredibly brave, and that is when the big pile of documents came onto his desk, he did the right thing, not the cowardly thing, not the selfish thing, but the right thing. And so I think we owe him, and that's probably why we're all here.
Well, thank you everybody for coming. It's great to see you all. Very moving, and the contributions are strong. There's a great site. It's just writejulian.com. W-R-I-T-E, Julian.com. It gives you all the instructions on how to drop him a line. And often in the conversations, he will say, I got this letter from Spain or Germany, or I'm getting more letters from Australia this week, or whatever. So I think that's important as Kieran. Personal testimony. It's not second-hand like mine. It's personal testimony gave to us. Write him a note. And the other thing you can do is that when you get together over the Christmas period, just chat about it. Awareness builds, where human beings don't understand quite yet how ideas travel through us and around us and bind us together. But they do, and the more we chat about it and gather together, being healthy as we are, and lucky in Australia, discussions lead to actions, because you work out what can be done in a chat. Not like this, you know, I can say, right, Julian, but when you get home and they say, well, I'll look at this site, oh, here, dear, you got any cards? Yeah, so off they go. It's very simple, it's not complex. Just build awareness. As we are healthy, awareness means action, and please drop it in the line. Yeah, thank you.
And I'll share one final thought. My friendship with John goes back about 25 years, and you might not know, he's an incredible builder, designer, architect. He was living in a house building just the most beautiful house with the most amazing detail on all the wood and the panels and pulling up the floors and going on over here. And it was a house, the first time I ever saw a grass-roofed house, it was in the middle of Newtown. And it was a house he had to sell to fund his ongoing plight to his son. And I hope that in a year's time he's able to sit there with his grandkids and his son and whittle away with something a little more face-to-face and human, and that it's a huge sacrifice that Julian's made, but of course everyone around him and who loves him, and I hope between now and then we can all work together and see some positive change in this space, because it is much needed for all of us, but especially Julian.
I'd just like to add, as a young woman,
oh no.
and her close friend at the time, Sarah's close friend at the time, Peter, we all worked together on a project in Lura, New South Wales, on the edge. We're building an amphitheatre, can you believe that? We're together building, it's big, you know, it seats 500 people and it's on the escarpment. And if you walk off the stage, you go down quite a distance. So, yeah, so that was 1986, yeah. So that was...
Well, thank you very much to everyone who's helped make tonight happen. North Coast Events and the people at Bay FM and all of you for coming along, and of course a big round of applause for our panellists tonight.